When a corrupt anti-Trump judge tries to belittle Karoline Leavitt in court, he's convinced he's untouchable. But when Leavitt pushes back, karma strikes fast, leaving the entire courtroom in stunned silence. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The air inside the federal courthouse was thick with tension. Judge Michael Reading was already in a foul mood. "I said no distractions in my courtroom," he snapped at his clerk, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. The young woman froze mid-step, quickly shuffling away. The gallery exchanged glances. Everyone knew Judge Reading's reputation. His rulings were consistently biased, always coming down hardest on conservatives, while protecting those who aligned with his ideology. And today he was about to face Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in history, a sharp, relentless defender of truth, and the last person Reading wanted testifying in his courtroom. His disdain for her was written across his face before she even entered. "The defense team has 2 minutes to be in their seats, or I start issuing contempt charges," Reading barked, his gavel striking down like a warning shot. The door swung open. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Karoline Leavitt stepped in. She moved with poise and quiet confidence, her expression unreadable. Unlike Judge Reading, she wasn't rattled. She had spent years fending off hostile media, exposing lies, manipulation, and corruption, and today would be no different. Reading watched her every move, drumming his fingers against the bench like a predator circling its prey. He wanted her gone before she even spoke. "Let's get something straight," he said, his voice laced with contempt. "I don't care what position you hold in Washington. In this courtroom, I am the law. Is that clear, Miss Leavitt?" Karoline met his stare, unflinching. "Crystal clear, Your Honor." Her voice was calm, composed. "I'm here simply as a witness to the truth." Reading scoffed. "Truth? We'll see about that." He turned to the defense table. "Now let's get this circus started." The moment the defense attorney began his opening statement, Reading cut him off. "For the record, I'm already tired of the political theatrics in my courtroom." His eyes flicked toward Karoline. "This isn't a press conference." The attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we're simply establishing the context of Mr. Sterling's char." Reading let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "The context? The context is that your client is accused of tax evasion. Period. I don't need a history lesson about his so-called charitable work." Every time the attorney tried to reference Sterling's community contributions, Reading shut him down with increasing hostility. "Irrelevant. Move on. I won't warn you again." The gavel slammed down repeatedly, so much so that the court reporter struggled to keep up. But when it was time for Karoline Leavitt to testify, Reading's hostility went from bad to unhinged. "Stand up straight when you take the oath," he snapped, though Karoline's posture was already perfect. "And speak clearly. I won't have any political doublespeak in my court." The condescension was obvious. But Karoline didn't flinch. "Your Honor," she began smoothly, "I can attest to Mr. Sterling's financial transparency regarding the Faith and Family Foundation." Reading rolled his eyes theatrically. "Oh, here we go. Another conservative fairy tale about family values." The gallery shifted uncomfortably. Even the prosecution looked uneasy at how blatantly the judge was broadcasting his bias. But Reading wasn't finished. He was just getting started. He leaned forward, his face darkening. "I've seen enough right-wing elites try to hide their money behind charitable donations. Your presence here doesn't impress me, Miss Leavitt." Then, with a smirk, he added, "In fact, it makes me question the defendant's character even more." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Reading wasn't even pretending to be impartial anymore. But Karoline, she remained unshaken. Her steady composure only seemed to enrage him further. His hands trembled slightly as he shuffled through his papers, his eyes darting nervously toward a specific folder on his bench. That's when Karoline delivered the first real blow. "I have here," she continued steadily, "documented evidence of Mr. Sterling's charitable contributions, including the March meetings." Reading's face visibly tensed. "Those records are inadmissible," he practically shouted, though no one had even objected. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. A few jurors exchanged uncertain glances. The defense attorney stood cautiously. "Your Honor, on what grounds are you? Don't you dare question my rulings." Reading's face was now flushed with anger. "One more word, and you'll be joining your client in contempt." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't judicial discretion anymore. This was a personal vendetta. Karoline folded her hands on the witness stand, her voice still calm, still steady. "Your Honor, these documents were properly submitted during discovery." Reading let out a bitter chuckle. Oh, were they? And I suppose your little White House connections had nothing to do with that. He narrowed his eyes, voice dripping with disdain. Let me tell you something about your kind, Miss Leavitt. You think you can waltz into my courtroom with your political privilege and— Objection, Your Honor. The defense attorney had finally found his courage. But before he could even finish, Reading slammed the gavel down so hard that it echoed through the room. Sit down, he bellowed. The courtroom fell deathly silent. The jury, the gallery, even the prosecution sat frozen. For the first time, it was clear Judge Reading wasn't in control of this courtroom anymore. His rage had given him away. And Karoline Leavitt, she had just exposed it. The tension in the courtroom thickened as Judge Reading's face burned red with fury. His gavel slammed down repeatedly, the sound cracking through the air like thunder. Enough of this nonsense, he bellowed, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. The gallery sat frozen, watching the judge spiral out of control. Karoline Leavitt, however, remained calm. Unshaken. She folded her hands on the witness stand and spoke, clearly firm. Your Honor, the documents in question were lawfully submitted during discovery. You can't simply declare them inadmissible because you don't like what they reveal. Reading's hands trembled as he flipped through his paperwork, his eyes darting to the folder he had been avoiding all morning. You don't tell me what I can or can't declare in my courtroom, Miss Leavitt, he sneered. This is my bench, and my rules apply here. Karoline's gaze didn't waver. Actually, Your Honor, this is a court of law, where rules and precedent apply to everyone, including— A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the prosecution shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Judge Reading's jaw clenched. He knew he was losing control, and Karoline knew it too. She leaned forward slightly, her tone, even but commanding. If the law doesn't apply equally to all, then what exactly is this courtroom enforcing? The gallery whispered among themselves. Reading's face twisted in frustration. He turned sharply toward the defense table. I'm warning you if you don't get your witness in line, I'll hold her in contempt. The defense attorney stood his ground. Your Honor, with all due respect, Miss Leavitt is simply stating facts. Facts? Reading barked out a laugh. The only fact here is that I'm the one making the rulings today. Karoline tilted her head slightly, her confidence unwavering. Then perhaps we should talk about the March 15th meetings, Your Honor. The entire courtroom, when for the first time that day, Reading hesitated. His hand still gripping the gavel froze midair. His reaction was immediate, visceral, almost panicked. Those meetings are irrelevant to these proceedings. He managed, his voice suddenly less certain, but his eyes flicked back to that folder, the one he had been avoiding since the trial began. Karoline watched him closely. Not relevant, she asked, her voice quiet but piercing. That's interesting, considering those meetings involve charitable contributions, one of the very topics you've deemed inadmissible today. Reading's knuckles went white around his gavel. I said enough. He slammed both hands down on the bench. One more word about those meetings, and I'll have you removed from this courtroom. A wave of murmurs swept through the gallery. The judge's composure was crumbling. His hands were visibly shaking now as he shuffled his papers, desperate to regain control. Then his frustration turned to desperation. His voice took on a manic edge. In fact, I'm holding you in contempt right now, he pointed a trembling finger at Karoline. You think your position protects you? You're nothing but a mouthpiece for Trump and his cronies. A stunned silence followed his outburst. Life. Even the prosecutor looked uneasy now. Reading had completely dropped his judicial mask. He had made it personal. Karoline, however, remained unmoved. She took a deep breath before responding, her voice measured and directed. My position has nothing to do with this, Your Honor. But since you mentioned protection, perhaps we should discuss the Liberty Foundation's protection payments. Reading's face drained of color for a split second. He said nothing. Then, like a man drowning, he lashed out wildly. How dare you? I mean, what payments? There were no— He cut himself off too late. His own words had given him away. Karoline tilted her head slightly. That's interesting, Your Honor, because I have some very compelling bank records that suggest otherwise. She reached into her folder and pulled out a set of documents. The courtroom collectively held its breath. Even the court officers were now paying close attention. These records, Karoline continued, show a series of payments made to offshore accounts, payments that just so happened to coincide with multiple rulings against conservative defendants, payments that just so happened to be connected to— She let her words hang in the air. Reading's breathing had become erratic. The judge's hand twitched toward his gavel, as if crushing it would somehow silence the moment. But the moment was already out of his control. Karoline flipped to another page. Shall I continue? She asked. Reading looked ready to explode. But it wasn't rage anymore, it was fear. I will not be interrogated in my own court, he snapped, his voice cracking. You think you can come in here? And Karoline remained silent, watching him. Reading's hands clenched into fists. He knew he had lost. The gallery was motionless, waiting to see what would happen next. But then the doors to the courtroom swung open. A team of federal agents strode in there. Badges glinting under the bright lights. Judge Michael. Reading the lead agent announced, "Stay where you are." Reading's face went completely white. His mouth opened. No words came out. Karoline Leavitt had done it. She had exposed everything. And the judge, who thought he held all the power, was about to lose it all. Judge Michael Reading sat motionless, his face drained of all color. The courtroom had been his domain for years, a place where he ruled unchecked, where his bias dictated outcomes, where he crushed anyone who stood against him. But now he was the one being judged. A team of federal agents stood at the back of the room, their badges glinting under the courtroom lights. Judge Reading, the lead agent, announced, "You need to come with us." A wave of whispers rippled through the gallery. Reading twitched in his chair, his breathing sharp and erratic. For the first time, he looked small, powerless, cornered. But then his expression hardened. He clenched his fists, anger flashing across his face. "This is a farce," he bellowed, his voice shaking the walls. "I have immunity. I have authority. This courtroom is mine." He pounded his fist on the bench. "Do you hear me? I am this court." The agents didn't move. Karoline Leavitt, sitting coolly on the witness stand, tilted her head slightly. "Interesting," she said, her voice sharp but calm, "because from where I'm sitting it looks like this court belongs to the American people." The gallery stirred. Even the prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Reading's eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an escape. "This is all a setup," he hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Karoline. "You and your White House cronies planned this." Karoline didn't flinch. She slowly rose from her chair, her presence commanding the room. "No, Your Honor, you planned this." She lifted a document, holding it up for the courtroom to see. "You made the rulings, you took the payments, you silenced innocent people. All we did was bring the truth to light." Reading's face burned with rage. "You think you've won," he spat. "You think you can just walk in here and dismantle everything I've built?" Karoline met his glare unwavering. "No," she said, "you dismantled it yourself." The weight of her words hung in the air like a hammer. The judge staggered back, gripping the bench for support. His breath was ragged, his forehead slick with sweat. And then the final blow. One of the agents stepped forward, holding up a second set of documents. "Judge Reading, do you recognize these transaction records?" The agent placed them on the bench in front of him. Reading's hands trembled as he looked down. His own signature, his own bank account. The money trails were undeniable. Karoline folded her arms. "5 judges," she said evenly, "all receiving similar payments on the same dates you did. All ruling against conservative defendants in coordinated cases." The courtroom erupted into hushed whispers. This wasn't just about one corrupt judge. It was an entire network. "Your Honor," the agent said, his tone almost mocking, "any last words before we take you in?" Reading's face twisted in fury. He suddenly lunged forward, grabbing his gavel like a weapon. "You can't do this to me," he screamed. "I am the system. I control the..." The agents moved fast. 2 of them grabbed him before he could do any damage, forcing his arms behind his back. The gavel clattered to the floor, rolling to a stop at Karoline's feet. She picked it up, studied it. Then, without a word, she placed it back on the bench, right where it belonged. Reading struggled as they tightened the cuffs, but there was nowhere left to run. The same iron grip of power he once wielded was now wrapped around his own wrists. The aftermath. The fallout was immediate. Judge Michael Reading was escorted from his own courtroom in disgrace. His chambers were sealed. His staff questioned. His years of corruption ripped open for the world to see. And the network he belonged to, collapsing one by one. Other judges, lawyers, and political figures tied to the scandal were investigated. The walls of institutionalized corruption were cracking. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Sterling's case was officially dismissed. The new judge, reviewing the evidence Reading had desperately tried to suppress, found no basis for the charges. Sterling was a free man. Justice had finally been served. Karoline Leavitt left the courtroom victorious. But her fight was never just about this case. It was about every case like it. Every American who had been silenced. Every person who had been railroaded by a corrupt system. And the message was clear. Abuse of power would never go unchecked again. As for Reading, he was now just another fallen tyrant. A man who thought he was invincible until the truth caught up with him. And as he was loaded into the transport van, his final words were not those of a man seeking redemption. They were words of bitterness. "This isn't over." But Karoline, she didn't even look back. Because she already knew the truth. There will always be those who abuse power. But there will always be those willing to fight back. And that's what keeps justice alive. Justice isn't decided by those who seek to control it. It's decided by those who refuse to let it die. If you believe in standing up for truth and accountability, make sure to like this video and subscribe Perfect Stories channel for more inspiring stories. God bless you, and God bless America.